Hello everyone and welcome back. In this video, we're going to dive into a lot of the different element selector methods. If you remember, there are two steps to updating the DOM, to modifying the DOM using JavaScript. The first is to select the element or elements that you want to modify, and the second is to actually modify those elements. So like I said, this is going to be all about selecting those elements. Now the first thing to remember is that in the DOM there is a root object, the document. That is document, spelled out, lowercase, and it's created for every single website. It is the document object. And all of these selectors we're going to talk about are methods on the document object. Now remember, methods are just functions that are attached to objects. So you have the document object, and on there you have several different methods that are functions used to select parts of that object. We're just going to talk about 5 selectors. There's more, but these are the most common and the most useful. If you learn these 5, you can do 99% of what you would like to ever do on a website. So generally speaking, these are all the ones that most people use. But just remember, there are more in case it comes up. The first one is going to be document.getElementById. And this is a method, you'll notice. And it does exactly what it sounds like. It gets a single element by ID. So let's open up Atom and add some stuff. h1 id equals my ID. Do the p tag. Let's add a class to that. Class equals p tag. We have, let's refresh our page so those populate. And we can look in our inspector to make sure, yep, class p tag, h1 is my ID. So in the console, we can do document.getElementById and pass in my, was it my ID? Yep, my ID. And that was the ID that we gave it, and hit enter, and it returned to that h1. If we have more than one h1, so let's duplicate this, but not give this second one an ID, my other title, refresh our page. So now in our inspector, we have 2 h1s, but only the first one has that my ID property. Document.getElementById, my ID. Again, only returns the first one. It does not return the second one. And remember, IDs are unique, so you can only ever have one element with that ID. So that document.getElementById is super useful to find single elements that have IDs on them. Another selector that's super useful is document.getElements, notice it's plural, by class name. And inside there you just pass the class name, and I think it was p tag. Was it p tag? Yes, p tag. And I messed up some capitalization. There we go. P tag. And notice that this is plural. Get elements by class name, and it will return all elements with that class name. You'll notice here it's an HTML collection. And the first, which an HTML collection is very similar to an array. There are some definite differences. I mean, it's a different thing. But if you think about it like an array, you'll be fine 99% of the time. So it returns an array of all elements that have p tag as a class name. Right now we only have the one, this right here. So if we did say const paragraphs equals document.getElements by class name p tag. Now we have paragraphs, and we could do paragraphs 0, which is the first element, and you'll see right there, it's that class, it's that tag. Let's go into Atom and update. Let's duplicate this and just write some random gibberish down here, and now we have both of these that have p tags. Refresh our page and do paragraphs equals document.getElements by class name. Let's make this smaller so we can see they're both there. And now if we look at paragraphs, it's an HTML collection with 2 items, the first one and the second. Each one is separate, so if we wanted to access the first, we could use 0. If we wanted to access the second, we would do paragraphs 1. This is useful if you have a lot of different items that have the same class and you want to update all of the classes to something else, or if you wanted to do every other one and update it. There's a lot of different ways you could use this, but it lets you select by class name. The next selector we want to do is to get elements by tag name. So const my h1s equals document.getElements by tag name We're going to do h1. In this, you just put the HTML element type, so h1 or p or body or or span or whatever, whatever element you want to do. It would help if I could capitalize correctly. Get elements by tag name. Yeah. So now if you look at my h1s, it is an HTML collection of 2 items. There's the first, and there's the second. The next 2 elements are very closely related, and these are honestly the ones I use the most and that most web developers use the most, and they are the query selector methods. There's 2 of them. There's query selector and there's query selector all. So const first title equals document.querySelector, and you put in h1, or you put in $, what did we call it? My ID. Or you put in .p tags. Basically what you do is you put in here the CSS selector for that item. So if I was going to target this in CSS, it would be Octothorpe my ID. Because remember that Octothorpe is for the IDs. If I was going to do a class, it would be .class or .p tag in this case. If I'm just selecting the element, it's just the element. And that's what you use in Query Selector. And what Query Selector will do is it will return the first item, a single item, the first item that meets that criteria. So if we did title, we would do h1. And if I look at first title, you'll see it's that first one. If I do document.querySelector and I put in Octothorpe my ID, it's that same one, because that has the ID, my ID. If I do document.querySelector p, it'll select the first p tag. If I do .p tag, it will select the first item with that class. If we update, let's give this one a class of red. Refresh our page. It'll select the first item with that class. If we do just a P, it'll select the first P tag. So Query Selector is super useful because you can use the same selector in a variety of different ways. You don't have to just target IDs, you don't have to just target elements, you can target any of the 3. Now be aware Query Selector is not as efficient as the other methods because it has to search through everything instead of just those specific methods. The vast majority of the time this does not matter. However, if you're needing to be very efficient and you have a lot of stuff going on your website and it's starting to lag or slow down, one of the things you can do is change your query selectors to get elements by ID or get elements by class name or tag name or whatever, and that will make your code a bit more efficient. But for the vast majority of websites, Query Selector is just fine. And the last one is another Query Selector document. Okay, let's do const all p tags equals document dot query selector all p. And what this does is this returns a list of all of the elements that meet that criteria. So if I look at all p tags, you'll notice it has 2 elements, the first one and the second, because those are the 2 that met the criteria. One thing to note, Query Selector all returns a node list instead of an HTML collection. If you look at get elements by tag name, document. You notice that returns an HTML collection, not a node list. We'll talk about the differences between these 2 in a bit in a later video. Just be aware that there is a difference, and this can come up and cause some strange interactions if you're not careful and you're not aware of it. So just keep that in mind. We'll talk about it later. So let's look at a few more examples and let's see what we can do. So we have a website here. Let's look at the HTML real quick. We've got DOM selector methods as the title, but the body is really all we care about. We've got 2 H1s and then another one down at the bottom. We have an unordered list with 3 LIs. The first LI has an ID. The second 2 LIs have class, and it's the same class, red. So we've got an ID number 1 We have one class applied to two elements, and that class is red. So let's just start selecting stuff. Let's say we want to get this first list item. Const first item equals document dot. Let's use get element by ID. Number 1. And first item is right there. It is that first item. And we can do things to it. Dot style, dot background, or let's just do color equals orange. And we have updated this so that the color is orange. So let's get the second and third item, which if you remember, both have the red class. So const other other items equals document.get elements by class name. Notice it's plural, by class name red. So now if I look at other items, if I can spell, other items, it returns that HTML collection where each one is red. And if I wanted to set both of those items red, I could not do this. And the reason for this should be relatively apparent. The HTML collection is an array. You have to loop through that array and set each item. So if I wanted to do this, I could do for let I equal 0, I less than other items dot length, I plus plus, and then we could just update other items I dot style dot color equals red. And now you'll see that they have changed to red because we looped through that array. It's not an array, but you can think of it like an array for these purposes. And then we simply set other items, and then that style.color equals red. So we loop through and set each item to red. So we could also get our elements by tag name. So const all title or all headers equals document.get elements by tag name. Notice this is plural, so it's going to get all of the H1s. All headers. You'll see it's an HTML collection with 3 items, 1, 2, and 3. Right there. So we could set all headers and set the first item dot style dot font family equals cursive. And then we could do this, let's see. We could get the second one and set the font family to sans serif. And leave the third one like it is, or we could update that however we wanted. And again, we could loop through that and change all of their colors or their background or anything we wanted the same way that we did with these 2 items with just a for loop. So let's go ahead and use Query Selector a few times to get a better understanding of how that works. And let's get this first p tag and then update, I don't know, the font size, something. So document.querySelector p dot style dot font size equals, I don't know, let's set it to 4em. Boom. So we were able to select that and update it. Query Selector, and we put in just the p, just like we would select it in CSS. Now, if we had a second one, it would have only done the first one. So if we change this to li, it will only change the first one. So font size to, I don't know, 2em. Notice it just did the first one because we only did Query Selector. We did not do Query Selector all. So let's do another Query Selector. This time, instead of li, we're going to get, let's look at our CSS, and let's number 1. So because it's an ID, we use the octothorpe number 1 dot style dot background color equals blue. And then instead of number 1, we could change the dot red. Now this right here, you'll notice, is going to work a little bit differently because, again, it only selects the first item. It's not going to select both of these. So when I hit enter, it's going to change the background color to the first one blue, but not the second one. That's very important to keep in mind. Query Selector only returns the first item that matches your query. The first item, not all items. If you want all the items, you have to do query selector all. Query selector all, and do, I don't know, we can do .red again. .style, .background color equals green. This is not going to work. Think about why this isn't going to work for a second. I'll show you it doesn't work. The reason this doesn't work is because query selector all returns a node list, not a single item. And because we have a node list, we can't simply change the property on the parent list. We have to loop through it, and on each element, change that. So if we wanted to, we could do that by setting it equal to a constant, or we could just do a for loop. For let I equal 0, I less than, there's 3 items, so I less than 3, I plus plus. Actually, there's 2 items for the red. Document dot query selector all dot red 0, or I'm sorry. So the first item, or the ith item, dot style dot color equals white. And you'll notice they both went white. This is a roundabout way to do it. It's not the best way to do it because you're making a lot of calls to the DOM. This is much less efficient than simply getting it once, setting it equal to a variable, and then looping through that variable. DOM calls, we haven't really talked about that much, but anytime you are querying or updating the DOM is what's called expensive. It's a very expensive thing to do, so you want to access the DOM through queries, through selections, through modifications as few times as possible. So basically what this is doing is it is querying the DOM for each time this loop runs. That's inefficient. Instead, it would be much better to const all LIs equals document.query selector all LI. And now that we have this, loop through it for let I equal 0, I is less than all LIs dot length I plus plus. And then you simply set that item. So all LIs I dot style dot color equals black. That is a lot more efficient. We haven't really talked about the need for efficiency and why it's important to be as efficient as possible because we're still learning the language and learning this kind of stuff, but that is something to keep in mind. You want to limit the calls to the DOM whenever possible. So we've talked about several different methods on the document that allow you to select items. The first was getElement by ID. The second was getElements by class name. Notice the plural. The third was getElements by tag name. The fourth was query selector, and the fifth was query selector all. Generally speaking, use whichever one you like. Use whatever sparks joy. Most people end up using query selector or query selector all for most things, unless you have just a massive website and you need to optimize it for performance. But use whatever one you like. I mean, whichever one works best for you. Sometimes specific companies will have code requirements that require you to use one or the other, and that just depends on where you work. But generally speaking, nobody cares. Another thing to note is that if you need to use any of the advanced array methods with like HTML collections or node lists, such as like for each or something like that, you can do array from. So let me give you an example of that. Const all p tags, or let's do all LIs. All li tags equals document dot. Let's just get elements by tag name li. So now I have all LIs. All li tags, and you'll see it's an HTML collection. If I try to do for each, it's not a function. There is no for each on an HTML collection. However, I can do const all li tag, let's see, all li tags again, or whatever, do const my li's equals array dot from, and then you put in your all li tags. You put in your HTML collection. And now I have an array. My LIs, not my list. Now I have an array, and I can do my LIs.forEach. And you see that it is a function. Up here it said it's not a function. Down here we're missing an arguments because we didn't do anything with the for each. But by doing this, array.from, we're able to convert it into an actual array, which gives us access to all of the JavaScript array methods. So that's just something to keep in mind if you need to use them. In this video, we talked about the 5 main ways for you to select elements in the DOM. Get element by ID, get elements by class name, get elements by tag name, query selector, and query selector all. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll be happy to help. Thanks.